Hello, and welcome back to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly Show. So today, we're taking a good look at the Sex Pistols' back catalogue. That's right, we're counting down worst to best.
Get up,
Okay, so straight away, first thing I want to say, because it's the first thing that anyone is going to put in the comments, I guarantee it, is that the Sex Pistols only actually made one album, which was Nevermind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols. And everyone knows that. Only one studio album made in their entire career, which only really lasted a couple of years. So I just want to say I'm fully aware of this, but I figured it'd be a good video to make anyway, just to have a look at some of the weirder albums that the record company put out. Normally when we do the worst to best albums, we will disregard all the live albums and all the compilation albums and just go in with the studio albums and just kind of do a run through of those. Obviously in this case there's only one studio album, so what we're going to be doing is looking at all the albums put out by Virgin Records, because I figured there's hundreds of different bootleg albums out there, like different Rare Live, War Live, Spunk, The Swindle Continues. All of these bootlegs I've had over the years, all put out by different kind of record companies. A lot of them had the same material on them, actually. It's basically just the Spunk Demos, which is an album that came out, I think a version of that came out on cassette tape and was being handed around before the actual studio album happened. So yeah, I thought I wouldn't count all of those. I'll talk a little bit about them, but we'll focus primarily on the Virgin Records releases, because I think that's probably a good way of going about it. That at least had one person, at least one member of the band or one member of production or something was involved in at least all these albums. I don't know, it seems like a logical way to do it for some reason. So obviously if you're going to watch this video you probably know already who the Sex Pistols are. Formed in, well basically started by Steve Jones and a bloke called Wally Nightingale and Paul Cook back in London back in 1972 or 3. It's quite hard to actually kind of pinpoint the very beginnings of it. Sometime around the early 70s, Steve Jones went and stole a bunch of David Bowie's equipment from the stage where he was doing the Ziggy Stardust farewell gig. That's what he said anyway, so that makes me think this must have been about 72 probably then, yeah. They stole the equipment, he formed a band with Wally Nightingale, they started playing, he started hanging around Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood's shop, which was then called Let It Rock. We'll talk a little bit about who they were. Malcolm McLaren's one of these, I don't know, bloody Artful Dodger type characters. He's out there to try and make a few quid. Well, he got in a relationship, partnership with Vivienne Westwood, who was into designing clothes. They started off with rock and roll stuff, so they went and did that great big rock and roll reunion. That was the early 70s. I can't remember exactly when, but they turned up and sold a bunch of the Little Richard t-shirts, the Vive La Rock and all that kind of stuff to them. They got hold of a shop, I can't exactly remember the name of it, but the shop had been going for years. It was a boutique shop. They ended up having like half records in one part and half clothing in the other. Basically, they took over the ownership of this shop. The shop was in King's Road. It's still there. It's called World's End. It's now owned by somebody else, I believe. I don't know. I think Vivienne Westwood's clothes are probably still in there. I don't know. It was originally a shop for kind of cool hippies and stuff. Then it became like a rock and roll themed place. Well, the Teddy Boys used to go in there. So that's when they started to kind of change their image a little bit to try and stop the Teddy Boys going in there because they were a little bit rough. And I think Malcolm McLaren didn't want to get beaten up by Oxbridge Teddy Boys, I think he put it. So yeah, it gradually became Let It Rock, and then became something else, and eventually became the sex shop that we know about, and Seditionaries and all that stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of history here to cover in a tiny little basis, so I won't go into all of it. So yeah, basically, so Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood were doing this. Steve, Paul, and Wally were doing that. They kind of somehow got together. I think Steve was caught stealing clothing from the shop, and they decided that it looked pretty good on him and he knew the right kind of places to wear it. So they had some kind of partnership there where they were just going to give him clothes to wear. Then they got into the whole management of the band. Glenn Matlock worked at the shop. So that's how they kind of got together, and they started to write songs. I think 17 was the first thing they wrote. But yeah, so the history of the band, they got together. Basically, Johnny Rotten was brought in for an audition because they liked the look of him. He was in the Gang of Johns. Sid Vicious was another John, basically. Johnny Rotten came in, he performed Alice Cooper's I'm 18 in a jukebox that was in the shop. and did a blinding performance of that. So he was in. Eventually, they started out doing cover songs, stuff like "Unlike Your Stepping Stone" and like the Who's "Substitute" and things like that, and Small Faces, and turning the lyrics around. Eventually, they started to write songs together, and yeah, the rest of it's fucking history, I guess. There we go. Yeah. Sid Vicious joined a little while later. They sacked Glenn Matlock because something about him didn't really fit the image of the band. Internal politics. It was probably all manipulated by Malcolm McLaren anyway, because that seemed to be the case of most of the Sex Pistols history. Sid went and died, obviously. Well, the whole Sid and Nancy thing. Go and look that up. I won't get bogged down into that whole thing. And then Johnny Rotten formed Public Image, and the other two Sex Pistols didn't really do much. They did a weird Christmas song with Phil Lynott. And then they reformed and fell out, and reformed and fell out. But yeah, we'll get down to the albums now, with my terrible little history of the Sex Pistols all done right there. So we'll start with number 7. So I consider there to be basically 7 albums by the Sex Pistols put out through Virgin Records. Pretty much nearly all compilations. So we'll start with number 7, Kiss This. So this album I'm not too bothered about really. It's a compilation. It came out in 1992. Features all the tracks from Nevermind the Bollocks. And there's a couple of interesting other bits put in there. I Wanna Be Me was the Anarchy in the UK B-side, and Did You Know Wrong was the B-side to God Save the Queen. Also, it includes the Silly Thing, the re-recorded single version, not the same version as is on the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. So I think to a lot of younger generation, like 90s kind of grunge kids and all that, and punk kids, this is probably how they found the Sex Pistols, probably their introduction to a lot of it. I don't know, maybe. I never had this album, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, it's got a fairly interesting cover work. I don't know, not really. I don't think there's anything particularly great about this album, really. It's just the Nevermind the Bollocks album put out again with a couple of extra songs on it, which is basically what it is. Yeah, no real interesting ground to cover here, I don't think. So, we'll move on to number 6. So, number 6, we have Jubilee from 2002. So, this was an album put out by Virgin Records to mark the band's 25th anniversary. Again, not that interesting, really. Another compilation. If you haven't got the Sex Pistols stuff already, then I'm sure this is another good way of discovering them or getting into them. But for a collector or somebody who has all this music, there's no reason to buy it. The semi-amusing album cover with the guards outside Buckingham Palace, and one of them's fallen over. There's a sort of joke that like Sid Vicious's dad was one of the guards outside, with the Beefeater hats or walking around. Yeah, I don't even know if that's true or not. This is one of the old legends there. It could be his dad that's fallen over on the album cover. I don't know. Probably not. I'm going to guess it's some sort of Benny Hill sketch or something. I don't know. But that's what that is anyway. And yeah, there's not much to say about it. There was a live version of Pretty Vacant on there, which you probably find on one of the other bootleg albums out there somewhere. I don't know. And at the same time, Virgin put out a box set called Sex Pistols, which came with an 80-page booklet. But I think the box set actually had some interesting stuff on it. I think that contained a bunch of recordings that were used for the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, but they had been re-recorded with the other Pistols putting Stephen Paul putting stuff over them. I think these were the original War versions without the overdubs, so that's kind of cool. So you're getting something a little bit different there, at least. Probably a few other weird odds and ends on that as well. But yeah, I mean, it's much the same again. It's another compilation, a not very, very interesting album cover, and just not much to it, really. Number 5. So now we're actually going to get on to something that is fairly interesting in a weird kind of way. So we're going with Flogging a Dead Horse, which came out in 1980, apparently. I always thought it was 79, but it says 80 on like the googly stuff, and that doesn't lie, ever, as we know. Yeah, it's got an amusing album cover, I think. It's got like a sort of model on it, kind of posing with a kind of big record behind her, I think it looks like. Yeah, here's the album cover, have a look. It's quite amusing, it's quite a funny thing. And yeah, that's basically all there really is for this album. There's nothing interesting apart from that, particularly. And the back cover is pretty cool as well. It has like a golden record with a sort of fake dog poop on it. So it's kind of replicating a bit of the Great Rock and Roll Swindle, where Steve Jones takes a shit on one of their golden discs which is yeah, cool. But yeah, that's the back cover. It's kind of cool. It's quite a fun looking thing. If you have this on vinyl, it looks quite nice, like in your collection, or stick it on the wall or something. I mean, the Sex Pistols themselves all probably hated it because it was just another cash-in. Basically another way for Malcolm McLaren and Virgin Records to make a few more quid. But they put it out as like an ironic kind of joke thing, because obviously Flogging a Dead Horse is exactly what it is. The last little bit of money we can make out of the Sex Pistols for the time being. The original album cover was going to have the Great Rock and Roll Swindle album cover on one side and then Nevermind the Bollocks on the other side. They would have had the writing just shoved across it, Flogging a Dead Horse. Just quite a cool idea as well. That album cover was actually existed. It was printed out, and I think you can actually get that somewhere. But they they cancelled it. I think they either cancelled it after a few copies were pressed, or they cancelled it after printing it out. I don't know. Either one way or another, it was cancelled and replaced by this kind of tacky Top of the Pops style album cover, which I kind of love. I don't know why. It's tacky, it's awful, but I kind of love it. So it featured tracks like tracks from Nevermind the Bollocks and tracks on the Rock and Roll Swindle, which had literally just come out. I suppose a few things on here, a few highlights. Did You Know Wrong? You couldn't get that before, I don't think. I didn't think that was available anywhere else, unless it was on the Rock and Roll Swindle. I don't think it was. So that's a new thing. So yeah, no, nothing really of any interest apart from the album cover. And I think that's the only reason that I bought it as a teenager, was I just wanted the album cover, really, and that's it. They should just release the album cover. We don't need the music. We've already got the music, you know. It's one of those things, isn't it? Only the Sex Pistols, really. Only the Sex Pistols. So next leads us to number 4. One of the most interesting, weird albums of their career. Not by far the best, but one of the interesting ones. So this is Some Product, Carry On, Sex Pistols. And carry on is kind of spelt like carry on food onto a plane or whatever. Different meaning to the whole Carry On thing, and also a play on the whole Carry On series again, because not a lot of people know that the original, so the Sex Pistols Rock and Roll Swindle film had been an ongoing project they've been trying to do for years and years. This is even back when all the band were together and kind of almost harmonious. Well, actually that never happened, did it? No, back when the band were still a thing, Malcolm McLaren hired Russ Meyer, of all people, to come to London and to make the Sex Pistols film. He made some interesting films early on, like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill was great. A few of the Russ Meyer films were actually quite good and quite interesting in a way. But yeah, a lot of exploitation, and sort of Mondo Topless is really what it is. But yeah, the Sex Pistols film would have been probably pretty terrible. And the idea was to call it Carry On Sex Pistols, so you would have had another Carry On film. Imagine that. Imagine if they got some of the people involved, Charles Hawtrey and Kenneth Williams. Yeah, I could have been an even bigger disaster, couldn't it? You never know, but interesting nonetheless. But yeah, so Carry On Sex Pistols thing, big joke there. But this album is interesting and also absolutely fucking awful in the same light, because we should examine some of the things on the album cover here. I'm just going to have a closer look. So we have the all the stuff from the Rock and Roll Swindle, the Rotten Bar, the Vicious Burger, the Fatty Jones box of chocolates, yeah, all the product stuff. The sort of joke that Malcolm McLaren put in that wasn't really all that particularly that funny. You got Sid Vicious Action Man, but he's dead in a coffin, which is also incredibly bad taste, isn't it? Really. A cardboard cutout of Sid there, and on the back you have the doorway of the Hotel Chelsea, which, as if you know the history and the legend and all that, it's the place where Sid and Nancy were staying, where Nancy was found dead under the bathroom sink. So yeah, it's exploiting. This album really is exploiting Sid's death, isn't it? And the decline of the Sex Pistols. I don't know if it's cool or not, but it's interesting nevertheless, I guess. Interesting in a kind of horrible, dark kind of way. It's an interview disc, isn't it? You know, it's bits of radio stuff they recorded in America mainly. In the sort of late 70s, when they went over there for their final tour, you know, the American tour, which was the final coffin in the nail of the Sex Pistols. Yeah, it's interesting. The interviews are quite funny. Like there's one bit where they're all asking them, where people are ringing in and asking them what they think about certain famous people. What do you think about Pete Townsend? And the answer was, he's got a big nose. Elvis Costello apparently wears glasses with no real glass in them. I could well believe that. I like the question of do you like Kiss? And they said they can kiss my ass. I thought it was a great reply to that. Not that I hate Kiss or anything, but yeah, that's funny. Yeah, no, it's good. It's quite an interesting thing to sit and listen to, really. And you've got Sid on there as well with Johnny Rotten. Johnny Rotten's getting just more annoyed at the answers that because Sid's doing his whole rock and roll poser thing, and kind of Johnny Rotten's getting like arsed off about it. It's got, of course, the infamous TV, the whole TV fucking rotter and all that stuff, as we know, Bill Grundy and all that. Yeah. In case you don't know what that is, they went on TV to do an interview, which was originally supposed to be Queen being interviewed, and Bill Grundy was pissed, because they were all pissed in those days. They went into the green room and they drank loads of like Blue Nun, and then went on TV with other people were kind of more, were more used to it, so they didn't swear, they didn't do anything too outrageous. Sometimes they'd pour like glasses of orange juice over each other and walk out and things like that. But the Sex Pistols just they were just being themselves like they were down the pub. This bloke's aggravating them, so they just start, what a fucking rotter and all that. And yeah, apparently some bloke got up and kicked his TV in because he was so angry about it. And this all made the headlines, the filth and the fury and all that. And it kind of started off the Sex Pistols, well, put them into the public frame and kind of elevated punk into a mass media thing. So the word punk comes from, basically it means kind of like street rat in America. It's been used to describe lots of music, like it was originally used by the music journalists to describe the early surf scene. Also like 60s garage bands as well, they're all called like punk and all that. And it was also used for the Ramones and the whole New York and this sort of CBGB scene and all that stuff. And then of course the label was slapped on the Sex Pistols. For me really, the scene that I'm kind of interested in the most, I guess it originated by, I think it was, forget his name right, Bernie Rhodes, who was the manager of The Clash. I believe he came up with that t-shirt, which side of the bed are you going to get out of? That hole that's split down the middle with the stuff on this side, the stuff on this side. And he came up with some of the cool sort of slogan stuff. That kind of started this all off. Then him and Malcolm McLaren were a partnership at that time as well. The time when they were forming like SS London and all that stuff. And this had all these people who went off to become famous later on, like Mick Jones and Rat Scabies and all the Sex Pistols, and all these people were kind of all around the same time working in these different bands. McLaren and Bernie Rhodes separated into two different camps. Bernie Rhodes had the Clash and McLaren had the Sex Pistols, and they became a kind of different tribal thing, Johnny Rotten kind of brought about the whole ripped clothes and safety pins. He was rebelling against the fact that the bin men were on strike and London was a depressing shithole and people were wandering around in like flares and mullets pretending that everything was okay. I think so he came up with this idea of like wear the bin bag and like dye your hair green and just look like the shit you're surrounded by, kind of that way. I love that idea. It's a cool kind of movement, and that started out what kind of movement I always think of when people talk about punk or whatever. And Seditionary's look was always a good thing. I mean, obviously, this kind of gear made by, I guess Vivienne Westwood would probably be the person who did this, a lot of screen printing and that kind of thing. Also, obviously, the God Save the Queen and all that. But yeah, no, I think it was a great image. The Clash did more of the kind of combat stuff and the zip jeans and but the Sex Pistols were the more bondage, weren't they? Because the sex shop was the whole bondage thing as well. It's quite hard to kind of really go back and discover who exactly started what. So now we go to number 3, Filthy Lucre Live. So yeah, this album's great actually. This was the second Sex Pistols album I ever bought. But yeah, the Sex Pistols reformed in 1996. And this was their big kind of comeback thing, which is a big surprise to everyone, really, because Johnny Rotten had been off doing Public Image. All the bridges had been burnt as far as everyone was concerned about the Sex Pistols, including a lengthy lawsuit with Malcolm McLaren and Johnny Rotten. Basically, McLaren trying to take all the money and all the image and all the rights and everything that he could, and Johnny Rotten saying, well, no, fuck you, actually, some of that should belong to the rest of us, So, yeah, big court case going on there. So yeah, they got back together in 1996, which is very surprising. I remember seeing a little bit of this on TV. They did like Top of the Pops and stuff, I think. It was interesting, man. It was good to see them back, and also with Glenn Matlock again on bass, because who else could it possibly be? Sid's gone. Have to go back to the original lineup. So the album was from a gig in Finsbury Park on the 23rd of June, I believe, 1996. And the album's fucking great. It's really quite heavy in places. It's really well played. I'm Not Your Stepping Stone was on there as well, which is one they used to perform quite early. A Monkees song, believe it or not, also covered by PJ and Duncan. Yeah, everyone's put their mark on this song. All versions of them are pretty good. Maybe not the PJ and Duncan one, but I love the Monkees version. Great album. It's also got Did You Know Wrong on there, which is a kind of sort of fan favourite anyway, because it's the elusive song. I don't know. But yeah, that's a great album. It's got a nice album cover as well. Yeah, what more to say about it, really? A bloody good live album, actually. Yeah. So, we're down to number 2. Number 2 is The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. Okay, so, in many ways, a fucking terrible album. In other ways, a very interesting, quite funny at times, quite a good album. I don't know. I've always been very two-minded about it, to be honest. They had rehearsals for somebody to replace Johnny Rotten because he had just left at this point after the fiasco of the San Francisco gig. I believe it was San Francisco. Yeah, Wonderland was it? Yeah. But yeah, the gig they did where that kind of ended their career as the Sex Pistols, basically. When they got back to London, Sid went off and Johnny Rotten went off. He had enough. John Lydon, and it just left kind of Malcolm McLaren with Paul Cook and Steve Jones. And so they went and hired. They had a big rehearsal. In fact, no, Sid was still there. I make a mistake there. Sid went off a bit later on, and we all know what happened there. But no, he was still there at this point because they all went and did this rehearsal where they were recruiting a bunch of like kids and people to come in and try and replace Johnny Rotten. Quite an interesting rehearsal, apparently. There's one kid who had a massive like punch up with Sid Vicious. They rolled around on the floor, punched each other for a while, and then a few minutes later they were sat there kind of hanging out. That's apparently what happened with Sid quite a lot. He enjoyed a good fight and he liked people who could hold their own, according to what I've read. I don't know. But yeah, amongst all these kids that were there were Tenpole Tudor, Edward Tudor Pole, who I've met and is a very, very nice guy. I had a nice long chat with him in a bar once. He'd been doing a acoustic set of his classics, you know, Swords of a Thousand Men and all that. Obviously the Crystal Maze as well, Tenpole Tudor. Everyone will probably remember Edward Tudor Pole for that. I don't know. But yeah, he was in the Sex Pistols for a little bit. He won the competition, I believe. Of course, they recorded Rock Around the Clock and Who Killed Bambi and the Great Rock and Roll Swindle theme tune, whatever it is, theme song, I don't know. That was all recorded from out of those sessions. Who Killed Bambi is a lot of fun. I love his performance of it on the film as well. It's one of the highlights of the film for me, is him dancing around doing that. But yeah, Tenpole Tudor kind of came out of that as well, which were great. I love Tenpole Tudor. All their songs are good.
Oh, shut up, Tadpole. You give yourself a conniption fit.
I don't care what anyone says. So, yeah, the Johnny B. Good and Roadrunner and all that stuff. So, basically, they wanted some new material with Johnny Rotten singing. They wanted to kind of present the idea that he might still be in the band for a little while before the film came out. I'm not sure how much truth there was to this. It's just something I read. Somebody secretly recorded one of their rehearsals earlier on with them just running through cover songs and trying to find out what, you know, fits and what not. So, yeah, basically these tracks, it was an old 4-track machine. Apparently the tracks weren't good enough to be put out commercially, so Steve Jones and Paul Cook re-recorded guitar and drum parts and bass and stuff over them, and that's what's on the album. I like it though. It's kind of it's interesting. Johnny B. Good's quite funny. Roadrunner's good. They don't know the words. They're getting Johnny Rotten's getting kind of angry. That's all good. And you got stuff like the Black Arabs, which I don't really understand. Disco version of it's like the Sex Pistols on 45, sort of disco version of the Sex Pistols songs. I don't really. They're in the film performing it as well. And then you got the new songs, obviously Lonely Boy and Silly Thing. Paul Cook sings Silly Thing on the album, and the single version was Steve Jones singing it. I don't know quite why that happened, but that was a thing that happened. The weird French version of Anarchy in the UK is quite entertaining. Another thing that's a bit of an oddity. The 2 different versions of Balsam Was a Gas. The live version is brilliant, actually, really enjoy that. But the version with Ronnie Briggs singing it isn't so great. He also did No One Is Innocent, God Save the Sex Pistols. That was a single as well that came out. They went to Brazil to meet the great train robber and hung out with him for a bit of the film and recorded a couple of tracks. This was kind of him making some more money and them making some money. I don't really understand why they did that. It's all a bit silly, really. John Lydon also has a real hatred for that. Like, what are you doing? I kind of understand his viewpoint on that. But there you go. And then there's obviously My Way and Come On Everybody and all that stuff. Yeah. Sid Vicious doing sort of cover versions in his kind of Sid Vicious way. And then the lyric changes on My Way are quite funny, actually. You know the ones I mean. There's a little dig at Johnny Rotten on there as well about people who wear hats and hide what they mean to say and all that stuff. If you go and listen to it again, it's in Johnny Rotten's book. He talks about it, saying, "Oh yeah, okay, nice little dig there from Sid," because they kind of fell out anyway around this time as well. And then what do you have? Yeah, You Need Hands. Malcolm McLaren trying to be a pop star. Yeah, I don't like it. Although he did actually achieve some pretty major success later on with his albums, like Buffalo Girls and all that stuff. But I quite like all that as well. I kind of wish I didn't, because I don't really like Malcolm McLaren very much because of what he's sort of done to people and how much of an asshole he kind of was. But yeah, those albums are pretty good. You got Friggin' in the Riggin' as well. So Friggin' in the Rigging, that was Steve Jones. That might be the best new Sex Pistols song from this album. That and My Way, probably. Friggin' in the Rigging's great. It's a lot of fun. When you're a kid, you want to sing along to that as well. It's kind of a funny thing. I don't know. It's very Viz, really, isn't it? But yeah, the album cover's pretty cool, and the Great Rock and Roll Swindle as well. The artwork in there, it's an interesting kind of fun album. It's probably more for younger people, I guess. When you get a bit more older and cynical, and you understand where the album came from, what the film was like, and what Malcolm McLaren was doing, it was all a bit. It kind of puts you off a little bit. And the film, I don't know, the film hasn't aged very well. It's better than Jubilee, if you've ever seen that. Derek Jarman, was it? I think, Jubilee. Yeah, if you go and watch that, fucking hell. I still can, because I grew up watching these things, but I don't know. I'd say Rock and Roll Swindle is probably about the same bloody quality, isn't it? I don't know. Oh yeah, and also there were a couple of songs recorded for this album that never made it to the album or the film either, which were Black Leather and Here We Go Again. Sometimes these songs are under different titles, like Finsbury Park and stuff like that. Yeah, one of them appeared on the bootleg album that followed about 8 years later, called The Swindle Continues. A load of crap, really. Just more outtakes and demos and a few things like that. Just kind of scraping the old barrel again, put out there. But it was a bootleg. It wasn't an official album, so, you know, it is what it is. Finally, we'll get to number one, and the number one spot can really only be Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols. Chris Thomas produced it. He worked with the Beatles on like the White Album, and he worked with Pink Floyd. He worked with all the people the Sex Pistols claim to hate, and then produced their album. There's some kind of irony in that, I don't know. Sid Vicious, like, all he did, I think, was he played a tiny bit of partial bass on stuff like Bodies and a few other things, but I can't imagine that actually got onto the album. I think he was in hospital with hepatitis while they recorded the album, and then when he got better, they kind of told him that he was on the album and he had done a good job, and he went, oh yeah, alright. Apparently that's what they say anyway. I don't know if that's true or not. I can kind of believe it though. So what they did though is they hired Glenn Matlock back to do all the bass on the album. John Lydon did say some pretty nasty things about that in his book, about why would you go back to a band that treated you so badly just for some money. I think that's pretty much every musician. A lot of musicians out there are quite happy to do that. I don't know. But yeah, he went back anyway and did that. Apparently there was no real hostility between him and anyone else apart from him and John Lydon, because Glenn Matlock and Sid Vicious played a couple of gigs together before Sid went off to America. A lot of the legend of the Sex Pistols is bollocks. Fitting, appropriately. But yeah, you have to, you know, when somebody famous once said, I can't remember who that was either, somebody once said that if you got to pick between the truth and the legend, always print the legend, because that's more interesting than the truth, because the truth is really usually quite boring. People don't really behave like you imagine they would behave, and the Sex Pistols probably very similar to that. So yeah, but the Never Mind the Bollocks album was just fucking great. I don't know what more to say about it. We got Holidays in the Sun, Bodies, No Feelings, Liar, God Save the Queen. Anarchy in the UK was the real, like, the thing that brought me to them, really. Just fucking fantastic. But yeah, all the talk of the Pistols not being able to play and being manufactured and all that kind of shit, just listen to this album, it will tell you very differently. All the songs in this album are great, and if that's people who can't play, then I'd rather listen to it than people who are fucking great musicians, you know? For me, this has far more interest, and it's far more, it just sounds better than like a fucking Yes album. Hasn't got all the amazing musicability and stuff, but what it has got are these fucking great songs, good riffs, good lyrics, and that's kind of what I want, really. You know, it works for me. Not that I'm slagging off prog rock or Yes or whatever, because I like that kind of music as well, but for people who get kind of snobby about it, well, fuck you. This is a great album. This is good stuff. And a lot of the other punk stuff that followed it as well. I mean, there's countless ones to say, aren't there, really? Even the bands from this kind of subculture that people rate much higher actually will tell you that they began that by witnessing the Sex Pistols. So, a very important band. So there are other albums as well. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of bootleg albums. I mean, Spunk being one of the main ones. As I said earlier on, that was probably the first actual physical Pistols album that most people had at the time. Yeah, there's other countless ones that came along later on. I remember going into like HMV and places as a kid and finding stuff like War and Alive and all that stuff. They're all just the demos and outtakes and all that kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of DVDs and videos out there as well of live gigs you can pick up. The one in Texas is quite fun. The one where they start throwing like bottles and pig heads and stuff at them. That was quite an interesting gig. That obviously ends with Sid smashing the bloke over the head with his guitar. It was a provoked thing anyway. But yeah, that was a pretty good one. But yeah, so I hope I covered a little bit of ground here with the Sex Pistols. Just wanted to make a little quick video to talk about some of their albums there. So please like, share and subscribe and all that bollocks. And also, if you feel like buying us a pint or something, there's a little link up there for PayPal. Chuck a couple of bits of money at us, like with buskers or whatever. That'd be great. I could do with it, really. Tell your friends you saw this video and like and subscribe and share and all that stuff. I'll say it all again. This is us signing out, I guess.